The Veneto region is studded with villas and gardens created over a very long period, lasting around 300 years from the 16th to the 19th centuries, set in an area with countless lakes, rivers and streams. In the territories that were under the sphere of influence of Venice, known as La Serenissima, there is still a surprising number of villas and gardens that this imperial culture has left in its trace. Some still exert the great charm they have developed over the years. Archive documentation helps us a great deal to understand what was then the richness and character of the gardens of the Veneto, gardens where practicability and beauty have always been combined. The property owners in the Veneto were extremely skillful managers of their economic resources and land. They never distinguished between beauty and usefulness. It's an intriguing story, where the hydraulic and engineering knowledge of the Republic of Venice is interwoven with the idea of a sober, restrained life, a dedication to literary pursuits that became so important after the 15th century. The garden we're in now, belonging to the Villa Barbarigo, is an example. It's a special place, a very original example of the Veneto garden, but it's a genuine embodiment of the change in function, this change in what gardens sought to express. In the first part of the 17th century, Val San Zibio belonged to the Barbarigos. They survived the terrible plague in the time of Manzoni that killed a large section of the population in Venice and the Veneto in general. The young head of the family, Don Francesco Barbarigo, decided to leave Venice and take refuge in the Val San Zibio in the hope of escaping the contagion of the disease. And he made a vow that if he, and especially his family, succeeded in escaping the plague, he would create a monument in memory of their salvation. That is exactly what happened. Don Francesco Barbarigo and his children weren't struck by the plague. They escaped the epidemic. And when it was over, they began to build a symbolic garden to commemorate their salvation. And that is what we see today. Antonio Barbarigo was the brother of Saint Gregorio, says Domenico Rossetti, who was the administrator for the Barbarigo family and an important figure in the history of the garden, because he was responsible for the publication of a number of engravings of the garden that show the Warren Island, the statue, and the view with the fish ponds. These give us a deeper insight into the subject and help us understand the wealth and beauty that the garden had to offer. The entire garden was conceived as a place to express and acquire knowledge, but also as a place embodying myths and the age. The design of the garden is a network of paths, creating a series of rooms, revealing a series of extremely beautiful, very meaningful settings. The maze, with the gazebo at its center, provides a view of the design of the entire maze from above. A maze with obligatory paths, so it's different from mazes where visitors can choose their path, which came later. The Rabbit Island, which recalls the Roman tradition where, once again, function and pleasure are combined. The series of fish ponds, fountains aligned along an axis that starts from Diana bathing and stretches to the hills, crossing the other important axis that starts at the villa and spans the garden in a perpendicular direction. The Pila fountain stands at the intersection of the two axes. It looks quite simple, but it's actually crucial to the function of the garden because it collects a reserve of water underneath, which then feeds the many aquatic tricks in the garden, their light, sound, and the idea of the joke that was so strong and so important in the 17th century. It entertained visitors and now allows us to understand the true spirit of those times. The Barbarigo's intention was to create a series of redemptive symbols to recall their salvation from the plague, but above all, to describe a much wider salvation, in the sense of moral improvement as spiritual elevation. In the 17th century, alongside a widening of the geometries and increasing complexity of the design, the gardens of the Veneto saw another very important element enter the picture, one that was destined to enjoy great success in the 18th century: sculpture. An army of statues populate the garden and enrich not only from the aesthetic point of view, but also through their meanings. A desire to bring the garden's elements together through themes that are dear to the families. The garden of Barbarigo in Val San Zibio is a typical example. Here, sculpture has a special weight and value, and every setting, from the front of the villa to the central avenue in line with the villa itself and the lateral areas, host sculptures that do not only depict gods and myths from antiquity, but also act almost as propitiatory elements: fertility, abundance, especially Diana. She recalls the hunt and, at the same time, the links this place has with the woods. One of the aspects that makes the garden of Val San Zibio unique is the fact that since it was created in the mid-17th century, nothing has been changed. The statues are all in their place. The written explanations are all where they should be. Diana's pavilion is exactly how it was when it was built. The garden, in fact, can be seen in its original form. And so it's not just unusual, it's unique. Italy's historic gardens are perhaps one of the aspects of our country's artistic and natural heritage whose profile we most need to raise through support and promotion. Today, Great Italian Gardens presents a sort of multicultural tourism, created by trails, itineraries that combine different cultural environments, and that through gardens can in some way highlight the age-old cultural relationships that have interwoven throughout Italy's long history.